Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Have you ever loved a pet? Have you ever lost a pet? If so, it was likely a big loss. For several years, I served as the pet loss counselor at the Humane Society of Silicon Valley. The quantity of tears I witnessed there was enormous. Pets give so much to us, especially the unconditional love we so badly need. And when they die, they often leave a big hole in our hearts. Right now, we are in the midst of shelter in place with COVID, and for many of us, everything can be a bit harder, including pet loss. So I thought it would be a good time to talk to one of the country's top experts, my mentor, Dr. Betty Carmack. In addition to being one of the kindest people I have ever known, Betty is also Professor Emerita at the University of San Francisco School of Nursing. In 1979, Betty lost her beloved dog, Rocky. She was bereft and sought resources to attend to the grief she was experiencing, but found none available. Wanting better for others, she initiated and led monthly pet loss support groups at the San Francisco SPCA for 33 years. In addition, Betty has provided care to the staff of humane societies, veterinary hospitals, and animal care organizations with their grief around pet loss. She has authored articles, presented at many professional conferences, and engaged in research related to pet loss. She is also the author of a book I give out regularly, Grieving the Death of a Pet. So listen in as Betty and I do a deep dive into the psychology of pet loss. Dr. Betty Carmack, who I will refer to as Betty, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for having me, and thank you for including this wonderful topic in our discussion. Thank you.
It's such an important topic, and I imagine, given that we're in the midst of COVID, it's all the more relevant if somebody's losing a pet in the midst of COVID and how much harder it might be given how big of a role pets play in our life. I'm just going to give a little context for the listener. It was somewhere at the beginning of 2002, I'm going to say February, and I was getting my master's degree, and I had just lost one of the great loves of my life, a cat who I think about all the time. And I realized I wanted to help facilitate pet loss groups. I thought, what a great idea. So I called the San Francisco SPCA and I asked, who runs your group? And the woman behind the desk said, oh, that would be Betty. And I love Betty. You are going to love Betty. So I left you a message thinking, Dr. Betty Carmack, probably a pretty important person. I knew that you taught at the university level and were kind of a big deal. Didn't expect to hear back from you, but heard back from you that night with so much enthusiasm. And you said, Adam, come, co-facilitate with me. It will be great. And you gave me such good coaching, such good feedback about my interventions and how to run a pet loss group. And I carried you with me when I ran a pet loss group at the Silicon Valley Humane Society for a number of years. So I'm just so grateful to you. You remain the voice. I give out your book all the time to people going through pet loss. And anyway, I'm just so glad to be here having this conversation with you.
Thank you for those very kind and gracious words. They mean so much to me, and I really thank you for that. And I remember meeting you back then. I just felt right away that we just were simpatico and that we were kindred spirits and that we both got it about pet loss. And I saw in you your strengths and how you could take that forward.
Oh,
so, thank you.
Oh, thank you right back. Well, we'll dive right into grief, just kind of grief before we even go into pet loss, because grief is really the underlying issue. I'm wondering, since grief is so central and something that most of us are not good at attending to, particularly in the United States, can you describe what grief is and why it is so important, Betty?
Well, when I think of grief, I think of loss, and I think of the intense feeling viscerally and emotionally and spiritually that and cognitively that we experience when we lose something of value, something that means so much to us. And I think of all the losses right now and all the grief right now in COVID. I remember reading not so long ago an article that came out that was talking about what's that feeling we're all feeling right now that's so unsettling. And the authors were saying it's grief, because it's all about losing something that matters. And I just the other day, I was talking with somebody, and their little dog just died. And he was saying that probably now with everything that's going on in the world right now, people may think that losing my dog was really very trivial. And I remember saying back to him, no, just the opposite. It's because of everything that's going on right now in the world that we need that stability and that presence and that interconnectedness and that love and all of that animals give us because of the grief and the loss and the profound uncertainty right now that we're all going through. And so much of that goes back to grief. And you're right, Adam, our country does not do grief very well. And we have this belief, I think, is just get over it. Just suck it up, get over
it.
Exactly. It's been 3 weeks already. Do you mean she's still grieving?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's been a month already. Isn't she over it yet? So we have this move on with it, get on with it, get on.
Mm-hmm.
And grief doesn't work like that. Grief takes time. And grief deserves our giving it the time that it deserves, to work it through, to be with it, to live it, to experience it.
You said it so beautifully. It's all about losing something that matters. And it's as if we just try to just push it down, it's a stifling, it's a quashing of something precious and almost disrespecting the relationship that transpired beforehand. That's just beautifully put, Betty. And that said, I want to just talk a little bit about pet loss, of course. You and I have both experienced the tears associated with losing a pet firsthand, as well as those just attending to them who've lost pets. The way I kind of describe it is there are more tears in that room than it feels like buckets of tears when attending to a pet loss group. And it's been my experience that losing a pet can be just so extreme. I was wondering if you could describe your sense of pet loss and how it can be a unique experience relative to grief itself.
Oh, yeah. And I think you said it so well that pet loss is unique in some ways, because my experience is that when we lose an animal, it brings out a grief that goes deep into someone's soul, because that's where an animal goes in us.
So true.
There's something, I think, profoundly different about the grief for a pet. And I hear this over and over. People will say, I've grieved more for my dog or for my pet or my bird, my cat, than I ever grieved for a family member. And it's sometimes that's a hard thing for them to say. There's a little sometimes hesitation to acknowledge that and say that.
Mm-hmm.
But when you unpack it and you look at what you shared with your animal, the intimate moments, how our animals are with us through everything, and they're there for us through everything we go through, the hard times, the good times. Then I think we see that we share with our animals something we never share with people. And we can be vulnerable with our animals. We experience a vulnerability. We allow them to see us at those times. And I think that's why the grief is so much more profound. I remember having people come to the pet loss support groups, and these would be people who, like yourself, were interested in exploring pet loss and seeing if this might be something they want to do. And they'd said other groups. But when the pet loss support group was over and we were talking about it at the end of the evening, they would say, I saw more grief in this room, and I saw more openness and vulnerability in this room. And I saw people's more willingness to open up and share their pain than they had experienced in other types of support groups. So there's something about an animal, I think, that allows us to go to that place of vulnerability.
It's amazing. What you just described is animal as common denominator. And one of the things I've seen, especially since the advent of the Industrial Revolution, prior to that time, we had a farm and the family worked on the farm. We had a common purpose. But now mom goes one way, dad goes the other way, the kids go to their place. And there aren't very many common denominators. And having a family pet can be a really, really healthful common denominator. Mm-hmm. And what you described amongst the group of grieving, the common denominator was all of them had been deeply touched by a pet. All of them had been broken open, and they all had the vocabulary to attend to each other's wounds in a very precise and profound way. So I just love the way you described that. The uncomplicated, unconditional love that we get from a pet makes it unique from where I sit too. Just that idea that every time I come home, I will be greeted exactly the same way. And it's dependable, reliable, and it's always great. Mm-hmm. It's almost as if they haven't seen me in a year and I'm being greeted with a great homecoming, and the absence of that. Wow. So I just love the way you described the uncomplicated, unconditional love that transpires there. Sometimes we actually begin to grieve long before the pet dies. For example, the veterinarian comes out with a diagnosis, and it appears that the pet's life will be shortened by an extreme amount, perhaps. And just the anticipation of that death date, the knowledge that the beloved pet will die. Sometimes that anticipatory grief, as it's referred to, can be more hurtful, more painful than the actual death of the pet itself. At least that's been my experience. I was wondering if you could speak about anticipatory grief as you've seen it.
Yes, and I speak not only as someone who's gone through it personally with my own dogs and what that was like for me, but also what I've heard clients say and what I've heard expressed in the groups. I think that there is, and I call this the getting ready time. I think there's a series of goodbyes as we acknowledge the changes. And like you said, we may get that through a diagnosis. The doctor may give us some information that kind of brings us up to the reality of life is different now. I think during that time, life can feel so much more fragile, and there's so much unknown, and there's so much uncertainty. And I think we're living with that tenuousness. And there's a lot of stress around that, because I think we take our responsibility very seriously. We want to do the best thing for our animal, and we want the highest good for our animal. And there's these decision points along the way, like at what point do I stop doing what I'm doing, and do I start maybe doing something different? And I think one of the things I'd like to stress today in our conversation is that there's no right way. There's no one right way. Let me rephrase that. There's no one right way. The best thing is what is right for you, and what's right for your animal, and what's right for your relationship. It's honoring what's best for you. And nobody teaches us how to make these decisions. This is not something that we've been taught. And so a lot of it is struggling through and trying to make those decisions. And do we look at quality of life over quantity of life? And when we're making our treatment decisions, and we do have the ability to extend our pets' lives through all the veterinary options that are available now. But I think that makes our decision even harder because the range of treatment options that we have, but just because we can, should we? And these are things people struggle with. And I think our values guide our decisions. What life values I hold to, and what does quality of life mean to my animal? And looking at weighing the decisions. Do I look at the things like how much risk is involved? What are the side effects? Would my pet like it? What are the benefits? What are the downsides? And I think all of this goes into that anticipatory grief period when people are struggling to find their way and navigate through this time. And it can really take a toll on the caregiver. And I think, to me, an important question at this time is, how much can I realistically do? Do I have the resources to balance the demands? Now, I'll give you an example. I had a friend whose dog was quite old, quite ill, and she would sleep on the floor down in the garage with her dog at night and wake up about 4 a.m. in the morning and take care of the dog's needs. And then she would go out to work, and she arranged to have some of us as friends come over and take care of the dog during the middle of the day. And then she would come home, and it got to the point where she could not sustain that. And it was taking such a toll on her and the relationship she had with her dog. And it wasn't the best thing for her dog, she was finally able to see. But those are those hard decisions and those hard choices. I do recommend one thing that people might want to look at, and that's the quality of life scale that Dr. Alice Villalobos has come up with. And it looks at things like hurt and hunger and hydration and pain and more good days than bad days. And it's a way to assess your animal's progress or lack of progress. But what I like about the scale is that there's a subjective piece to it, but there's also an objective piece. But it's what is acceptable to you. There's a scale there. And you're the person who decides what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So I just pass that on as a resource. That's something that I've referred clients to in the past. And some have found that can be helpful.
I'm going to do my best to include that resource in the show notes of this episode. I love the name Dr. Alice Villalobos because it literally means Dr. Alice and the House of Wolves. So it's a very appropriate name. And I'm loving what you shared about the overwhelm that can accompany a terminal diagnosis of your pet. I remember when Yoda, my cat, had been diagnosed, and I was just so overwhelmed and just trying to figure out what to do. And that was when I figured out a treatment plan that made the best sense given the circumstances that were surrounding my guy. I felt so much better just knowing, like, okay, this is a sane approach, and it will give him the longest quality of life, to your point, because I knew that there was no cure for what he had, and I needed to extend his life and ensure that he was not in pain, and that if he ever told me he was, I had a little contract, so to speak, that I would do the hard thing and let him go. That said, we spend so much time keeping our animals alive. And it can, even though it's an act of real love, it sure doesn't feel like it when we say to the vet, it's time. It overrides all of our natural instincts. And after having engaged in euthanizing a wonderful pet, we second guess because it goes against everything we've been doing for the pet's life. And I'm just wondering how to reconcile that idea of mercy and love in that form that feels so counterintuitive.
That's such a good question. And as you know, that's something that people really struggle with. Even when they know in their head that this was the right decision, and even though they know when there was really nothing more that could be done, there's that questioning. And I think what I try to encourage people to do is to give themselves a little time for their heart to catch up with their head.
What a beautiful statement.
Give yourself time to let your heart catch up with your head. Because intellectually, you probably know there was nothing more you could do, and you made the best decision for your pet. But as you said, Adam, it goes against everything that's in us when we try so hard and so long to have kept our pet going. And there's that part in there too that, I don't know if you found this, but I surely have heard people talk about how they don't want to play God. And there's suspense in having to make that decision about euthanasia, that they're playing God. And that's hard for people to come to reconcile that with. I try to help people see that I think that euthanasia, something certainly unique to pet loss, but that it is it can be such a compassionate and loving act. And it's such a privilege to be able to give that last gift to my animal, to let her or him go. I was just talking just yesterday, I think it was, with a young woman and her husband. They had to say to the vet, okay, it's time. And she talked about how it was so loving and so gentle, and that her dog wasn't frightened, and her dog was in her arms when her dog took her last breaths. And that what we as people need to remember is that our animals aren't frightened, and that we can make it loving, and we can give them that gentle, good death. And she was talking yesterday, she was saying that she always hopes that she makes the decision to do it one day too soon rather than one day too late.
Wow.
She'd rather do it one day or even 2 or 3 days too soon than 2 or 3 days too late.
That's really powerful.
So you're right. That is such a hard decision. And both the research I've done and the writings I've done and the work I've done, people say over and over, that was the hardest thing I ever had to do. That was the hardest decision I ever had to make. And I hope we never forget how hard this is for clients that we help, or for friends that we have, for family members that we have, as we try to support them through that decision. And again, there's no one way to answer those questions. There's no one way. It's what's right for you and your animal and your relationship. Or that's how I see it.
I agree. It's unique to the individual and the relationship that is shared with the beloved pet. So 100% concordance over here. That really, that's beautiful what you just said.
Can I just add one
Yeah,
more thing?
please.
That when I'm working with people and we're looking at this last time, this time of before trying to decide what to do, I have found this to be such a time of profound love, such devotion, and such fidelity to the animal, and such a commitment to the animal. This is such a time of preciousness. And I always try to tell people, savor this time. This is precious time. This is precious time. And I encourage them to think about minimizing any regrets, so that when they look back on it, that they know in their hearts that they gave their animal the most gentle, loving death that they could give. And so to minimize regrets, think through how, when you look back on this, you want to remember it. Because a lot of times, Adam, people don't know that they have choices. They don't know that they can make this, an in-home euthanasia where the veterinarian can come into the home and it can be gentle and loving, and you can do some rituals around it if you want to have some prayers or poetry or some gentle music, whatever. So to think about what would make it meaningful for you. And then I encourage people to build that in. And I also encourage people to avoid crisis, that if you can avoid having to, because I know a lot of times people want to delay it and push it back a little bit. But I've also seen when it can become a crisis and the animal has some kind of a medical emergency. And then there's the rushing to the vet or rushing to the emergency vet. And then that gentleness and the quiet that you'd wanted to have happen wasn't able to happen. So I try to prepare people for the fact that that could happen. So try to think through how you can avoid that.
It's such a great
so again,
point.
When you look back on it.
Yeah, you're just trying to avoid that version of complicated mourning where not only you mourning, but the way the exit transpired was so far from optimal. And the last taste of terrestrial experience that you have with this animal was in crisis, and how important it is to avoid just that. As you're speaking, I'm also just thinking about how animals are teachers, and they often usher us into new stages of life. You were talking about rituals. I was thinking about rites of passage, and how having Yoda and helping him going against all of my natural urges to keep him alive, and overriding all of that to help him, as you said, compassionately, and using that version of fidelity, which feels so, it just goes against every grain of how I'd been with the animal and that beautiful pet, and how they serve as teachers around loss and mourning, the preciousness of being present and being alive, and the short time that we have between our life, our time alive and our time we die. I was wondering, what's your perspective on animals as teachers?
Oh boy, I really like that question. And that's something that I'll ask people often. I'll say, what did your animal teach you? What did your animal teach you about living? What did your animal teach you about dying? And people come back with answers that just really touch me. They talk about how their animal taught them how to be more loving, how their animal taught them how to be in the present, how their animal brought their family closer together, how the animal allowed their family to share feelings of vulnerability that maybe they hadn't shared before. I remember one woman talked about how her animal's passing taught her that she's stronger than she thought she was, Another person spoke about how her animal taught her that she was more loving than she ever knew she could be. And a lot of times I think animals help heal maybe some wounded parts of us that need some repair. And they do it in such a loving way. And those are lessons that we carry with us. I remember one time suggesting to somebody that she write down what were all the lessons that her dog had taught her. And she came up with numerous ones, some of which I've kind of what I've talked about here. But the playfulness, how my dog taught me how to play.
Mm-hmm.
My dog taught me how to be happy in the evening when my loved one walks in the door. About contentment, about being able to just be content and purr and need nothing more. So I think animals teach us so much. And I think when people are going through illness and their animals are there to support them through illness, and they maybe look back at how their animals went through their illnesses. And people, I think, gain strength from that, having observed their animal going through an illness. So I think the lessons are there if we just open our hearts and our eyes and our minds to them.
You know, Betty, we are so far away from our nature, so to speak. We've kind of abstracted ourselves. We drive in cars. We have artificial light. We have these incredible phones that are smarter than anything that got us to the moon. And we are so far away from our animal nature. Recently, I was interviewing a musical duo called Sea Stars up in Washington State that just makes some of the best music. And I asked, where do you draw your inspiration? I was imagining, Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan or something like that. And they said, we get our sounds from nature is the primary source. We like listening to nature. And I'm thinking about what you're saying now about how animals can serve as role models, almost paragons of happiness and being present. And wow, what if I were a little bit more like my dog in this way, in terms of loving with reckless abandon and just really going heart forward rather than kind of hiding my heart as I've become so accustomed to doing. I often think of the necktie and I know not many of us wear those these days, but it serves as kind of a symbol of kind of a demarcation between our head and our heart, and how there is no distinguishing between head and heart for our animals. They are all head and heart together, merged, and how they serve as such just good exemplars of how to live that way. I'm just taking such delight in knowing that. One of the practices I've also recommended, I believe you taught me, was that at the end, writing a beautiful eulogy and including what the animal has taught us, so that the animal can live on in the teachings provided to us. And that relationship just continues even though the animal is no longer there. There's no question in my mind that Yoda prepared me to be a good husband and a good father. And so I just, as always, resonate with what you're saying. I was wondering, what are some other tips, though, for mourning your pet well? We've touched on a few, but I'm just wondering how to cope, how to mourn, how to grieve well.
Well, I would say the first thing that I would suggest is to honor your feelings and your experiences. It's your journey of grief. It's nobody else's. And pay attention to what you need. And when I say that, I mean, do you need time alone? Do you need support? Do you need nature? What do you need? What gives you comfort? To acknowledge that this hurts. This is intense. The duration of it can last longer than you ever imagined it would last. And the intensity is gut-wrenching for you. And you had no idea, you knew it would hurt, but you didn't know it would hurt this much. So to acknowledge it, honor it, pay attention to it, take care of yourself, do self-care, Find trusted people that you can share it with. Find people who will support you as you live through this and as you grieve through it with all the feelings and all the thoughts and all the behaviors that accompany it. I always remind people, don't put this out where it's going to be trampled on.
Mm-hmm.
It's too precious. It's too precious. Only share it with people who will support you. But I think things like, one of the things that always gives me comfort is to light a candle.
Mm.
But every time I've lost an animal, for a week or 2 weeks, I light a candle whenever I'm especially feeling lonesome for that animal. And that there's something about the warmth of that candlelight.
Mm-hmm.
And I write, I'll write down what it was I loved about that animal, and I'll look at pictures. And I keep that spiritual connection going. Now I know for some people that's not comfortable. They do not want to look at pictures. That's much too painful. And they don't want to have to do that remembering right now. So again, there's no one right way. That's why I encourage people to do what's comforting to you, what nurtures you. If it's a warm bath, if it's crawling into bed with your pet's blanket, if it's going for a walk in nature, if it's going out to the beach and sobbing or weeping, whatever it is that nurtures you. No one right way, but and then things like just take care of yourself. Be sure that even though you don't have much of an appetite, that when you do eat, that you eat healthy, nutritious foods. And even though it's hard to sleep, at least try to give your body some rest. And be really careful when you're driving, because grief takes our attention off of our focus and our concentration. And be gentle with yourself when you're working, because it's hard cognitively to focus. And don't expect yourself to be able to perform or be in the world the way you were before. You have lost a significant relationship. You've lost a family member. For many people, it's like losing a child. And I try to remind people, if this were a human child or a human family member, you wouldn't expect yourself to be over this in a week or 2 weeks. I try to bring that perspective of how large of a loss it is, and you deserve the time to work it through and give yourself time. It comes in waves. I remember one night in a pet loss support group, somebody was describing how for her grief was like walking down the beach, and little waves would come and lap at her feet, and she'd keep walking, and then a wave would come and get her maybe about knee high, and then keep walking, and then a big wave would come and knock her down, pull her down, and she'd get up and keep walking, and little waves again, and mid-sized waves. And the point she was making was that her waves of grief, her grief was like waves of grief. And she allowed for that. She came to know that this is how it's going to be. And when the big waves come, to pick herself up, know she'll get back up, know she can keep walking, but to allow for that, to be gentle with herself, to honor those feelings and to honor her experience. It's her experience. And to honor timelines. There's no timeline that you only have 3 weeks or a month or
Right.
I mean, I know people now whose animals have died almost a year ago, and they're still still struggling. They're still grieving. They're still hurting. Life is different for them, and it's taking them time. And I encourage them to honor that and give themselves time.
I'm really resonating with that idea, and that it's very personal, that some of us are able to move quicker than others, and depending on the quality of the relationships or just how we metabolize the mourning process itself.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the animal even comes to represent an era in our life, like when we had children before they were off into college.
Mm-hmm.
That animal was there the entire time. And afterward, not only are we grieving the animal, but we're grieving the era that the animal, the history. It's almost like the animal was a historian or a fellow traveler during that precious time of life. So it can be complicated by that. I'm wondering, that said, it's so painful that many people may come to the conclusion, I never want to go through pet loss again. It's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly an individual choice. And I wouldn't trample that idea. And yet there are so many documented scientific health benefits for having a loving human to animal or animal to human relationship. It seems to go both ways, fortunately. But I was wondering if you could just talk about both the health benefits associated with having an animal in our life, and maybe why it might be worth getting another pet when you're ready.
Okay, yeah. And I think we're certainly seeing now during COVID, when you hear about the importance of people's animals, and people write about that. They show pictures of their animals and how their animal is their companion through this. Their playmate. It's what brings maybe some stability, some constancy to their life, maybe a little bit more predictability. The whole sociability piece of pets, how they get us, especially dogs, get us out, get us engaged with other people. The health benefits, the cardiac benefits from taking our dogs out and walking, the whole physical benefits. But I think, too, that whole sociability thing. But right now in COVID, I'm sure you've probably seen this about how all the shelters have just now been emptied of animals. And the fostering animals have been taken now because people want this animal, the presence of an animal in their life. They know that these animals can bring them this.
Yep.
And so I think when people are ready, but when they're ready differs so much for each person. And I'm sure you know, as I do, that to ask somebody, or they just say, are you going to get another pet? It's so hard for them to hear.
So hard.
When they're in the depths of their grief, to be asked that, even though it's well-meaning, it's well-intended, that's sometimes the last thing that they can think of right then. And they feel like with that question sometimes that their grief or that relationship is being trivialized, that they can just go out and replace it. And they know they can't. But again, some people, as we know, need and want to bring an animal right back in because the house is so empty.
Right.
And in no way is it betraying the animal that died. But to them, they know they have so much love to give. And they know that the animal will give so much love to them. And they think that this is the way to honor the pet that died, because it's showing, you gave me so much love, and you will understand why I'm bringing another animal in. So again, there's no one way to do this.
Totally.
Some people will never get another one, but others will. And what I've always appreciated is when somebody would come to the pet loss support group, and the depths of their grief, the intensity of their grief. And then maybe about 8 months later, they would come back and they would say, I came back to tell you in the group that I adopted another animal. And this is her picture, or this is his picture.
That's amazing.
And they were able to have moved through the grief and gotten to a place where they could open their hearts again to sharing that relationship and sharing those benefits that we were talking about. But they needed the time to get there. And it was on their time frame.
Right. It was funny. It was after Yoda died, after I helped him pass, I was in no way, shape, or form ready to get another cat, but I did want to spend some time volunteering at the Humane Society, and they gave me a tour of the place. This was about a month after he had died, actually just a little over. And I was in no way, shape, or form ready to have another cat. The last place they brought me was the cat room. And that was the same room from which I had actually adopted Yoda. And in the cage just below where Yoda had been, there was this orange tabby who was shoving his paw through, meowing his head off. Oh. And he had the funniest eyes I'd ever seen. And I wasn't at that time particularly attracted to orange cats at all. But I asked if I could hold this cat. And that was it. I was not ready to have a cat, but a cat was ready to have me. I took him home. And while he by no means got rid of all of my grief, I would say, even though I brought him in before I was ready, I would say about 80% of the intensity of the grief was diminished, or at least I should say the depressive symptoms. And he became the greatest cat. I mean, just a rock star. And I still smile when I think about him because he had a good life. We had a great time together. A rather funny story was that my wife didn't particularly like his name. And before we got married, I asked my wife, would you be open to taking my last name? And she said, yes, but I do have one request, that we change the cat's name. So the cat's name was changed from Flash to Max. And he was the perfect guy for us. And I'm just, in terms of the health benefits, just the oxytocin levels, we have well-documented research showing that oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine, endogenous hormones that make us feel good, are more present. And as I believe I now have a dog in my private practice. And when I was seeing people in person, they almost without exception adored having the dog next to them. And one of the pieces of research that seems to be showing up is that people are more likely to say the unsayable with a pet in the room, a pet that they like, of course. And he's hypoallergenic. He's just been perfect. He's very docile. He was actually bred to be a trained and licensed therapy pet for my office. But I'm with you. There's just so much good that comes from having a beautiful animal. That said, in spite of the fact that Max, the orange cat, did heal me of a lot of my sadness. To this day, if I see a video of Yoda, I mean, my heartstrings just oh my God, heart just jumps out of my chest. So I'm wondering, we're kind of coming to the end, but I'm wondering, Betty, if you could magically give the gift to everyone of having a more meaningful relationship with their pet, or a better ability to deal with loss, or both, what skill or awareness would you want to give?
I think I would like people to know that it's about, I keep going back to the words about honoring your relationship and your journey of grief. It's yours. It's about your relationship with your animal and what you all had, and to honor that. And also to let you know that there's no one right way. I've said that a couple of times. And it's normal. It's natural to feel the intensity of the grief when we lose these beloved animal companions. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. People will ask me, does this mean I'm crazy because I'm feeling this?
Mm-hmm.
No, there is nothing wrong with you. This is normal and natural. And I think it's an indication of how much you loved. You're grieving because you love. And then I think the other piece I'd want to leave people with is you don't have to go through it alone. There are resources to help you. There are support groups, there are books, there are online resources, there are counselors, there are hotlines. You don't have to go through it alone. And those resources are there because I think that validates and legitimizes the experience of the grievers. That's what I've always tried to be about, is legitimizing people's grief and letting them know that their grief matters, because it does. These animals touch our lives in these deep, deep ways. And of course, we're going to grieve for them. It's our way of showing that love again.
As I hear you reflect on this piece, I hear you saying and repeating the importance of pets' roles as midwives, essentially, to our truth and love, our capacity to love. And they help us live more congruently, more authentically, and tap into who we really are. They heal us along the way, and they break our hearts, but break our hearts open at the end. And perhaps we come out much stronger on the other end, in spite of the cost of the pain associated with losing one of these precious, precious little angels who come into our life. Betty, I'm just so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and your heart. And I'm so grateful for our friendship and your mentorship over the years. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for having me. And thank you for what I've learned from you today. Thank you.
Right on. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. To listen to other great episodes or to get more information about today's episode, please visit me at my website, dradamdorsey.com. That's DradamDorsay.com, and click the Super Psyched podcast link.